Hi, I'm back. This is the second video for this week's module. I hope that you found the YouTube video on the structure of the informed speech. I hope that you found that to be valuable and worthwhile. I think it was pretty well done. We're ready now to move on to the next part of preparing your speech. There are two parts to making speeches, the content and the delivery. Let's finish up the content by talking about putting your ideas into a well thought out plan and putting that in writing by way of an outline. Now, we are requiring that I have in my hands an outline prior to you delivering your informative speech. And the reason that we require an outline, quite frankly, is because I don't want you to disrespect your audience by taking something off the top of your head. It needs to be well thought out and well planned before you actually deliver it. And we're going to require a full sentence outline. And let me share my screen with you and explain for a couple of minutes about a full sentence outline. I'm trying to maximize it. I don't know why. There we go. Okay. I'm sorry that it took so long. Yes, we're going to require a full sentence outline. I'm going to explain it and give you an example in just a minute. But let me share a quick little story with you. Of course, when I was in college, I was a speech major. And of course, my roommate was an English major. And we had a little thing going that the English professors would say that a thought is not a thought until you write it down. And of course, my roommate used to hit me with that all the time. But as a speech major, I would say, no, wait a minute now. A thought is a thought if you can express it. It wasn't until I got into graduate school that I realized that this is actually true, that a thought is not a thought until you can write it down. And now you can write it down in a number of different forms. Now you can write it down as a manuscript speech. As you know, we don't do that. We deliver our speeches extemporaneously, which means very well rehearsed, moving from point to point in a conversational tone, so that we don't have to read it or memorize it. Okay, so the important thing to know is what kind of an outline to use. Okay, now here's an incorrect outline, which we would refer to as a key word outline. And let's say that your first main point was the beginning of football. Okay, well, you can use a key word, and then the first piece of supporting material would be two different sports, and then elaborate on that. But you see, in an in a key word outline, you have not gone through a full and complete thought process. Okay, you may think that you're comfortable in knowing what you're talking about, but you're not going to really know what you're talking about until you can put it into a complete sentence. And the key thing about a full sentence outline is that every single item in the outline, the main point, the first piece of supporting material, the sub point under the supporting material, every one of those items is a complete sentence. So instead of saying the beginning of football, well, what do you really mean here? Well, let's look at the example. The game of football has come a long way since its beginnings. You see, that is a more thought out idea. It's not just the beginning of football, it's that it has come a long way. Now, anything that you supply underneath that in form of supporting material has to relate to that statement. Well, you can say two different sports, but that doesn't really flesh out what's really on your mind here. Instead, you would say football is actually adapted from two different sports. Now, when they're talking about football here, they're talking about soccer, of course. Now, notice in the outline, they put in parentheses, Ominsky. Okay, now what do you think that is? That's the source from which the speaker took this information. And you must recite your sources. You must provide your sources and recite your sources. Tell the audience where you got the information. If you don't do that, then you are engaged in plagiarism. Okay. So football is actually adopted from two different sports. Well, that supports the fact that it's come from a long way, okay? And it also elaborates on this idea that it's two different sports. Okay, one, English soccer, 1823 rugby. While playing soccer in 1823, an English soccer player got frustrated and picked up the ball and started running with it, creating the sport of rugby. Well, that explains it. That is a complete thought. It is a complete sentence. Now, the other thing you want to remember is that each item is one complete sentence. You don't want to write two complete sentences or three complete sentences. That becomes a paragraph. That becomes, in fact, a part of a manuscript speech. And of course, we just don't do that. Okay, subpoint number 2 is between 1880 and 1883, Yale's rugby player changed role. Well, what do you mean by that? Between 1880 and 1883, as rugby grew in popularity, one of the Yale's rugby players conceived a new set of rules for the game, very similar to today's football game. Now, this is a well thought out, complete line of thinking. This is not. So I don't want you to hand me a keyword outline. I want you to provide a full sentence outline. Okay, this is the main point represented by a Roman numeral 1, and on your computer, that's the way it's going to look. Okay, and then your first piece of supporting material will be indented with a capital A. And then if you need to elaborate on, I should be looking down here, by the way. If you need to elaborate on that sentence, then you go down to subtopic number 1, indented number 1, and put in another complete sentence. Okay. Now, these are examples of supporting material. Now, what is supporting material? And you might want to write this down. Okay. Supporting material is amplification. Amplification is the process of enlarging upon an idea or a statement in order to bring it within the experience of the listener. These are examples of supporting material. Okay, they elaborate. These elaborate on this. This elaborates or amplifies this. Now, what are examples of supporting material? Facts, statements, quotations, statistics, a narrative, examples. These are all examples. It could be a visual, could be a chart, okay, or a visual of some kind. These are all examples of supporting material. Okay, so this is the essence of a full sentence outline. All right, let me stop share here for a minute, and let me go to another visual. And here is an example. Hang on, here is an example, and let me see if I can enlarge upon that. Okay, here is an example of a full sentence outline. Now, here's the way I'd like you to present it to me. Put your name and then the topic. Notice the topic here is negative effects of divorce on adolescents. Interesting topic. Specific purpose. I will inform the audience of the 3 most serious negative effects that divorce has on kids. Okay. Then what's your thesis statement? This is something that you might even say. Now, your specific purpose is not something that you're going to actually say within your speech, but your thesis statement very well may be. It has been reported that there may be as high as a 54% divorce rate in America, and the effect it has on children is rarely understood. And that's pretty much what you're going to cover here. Okay, rarely understood things that happen to kids as a result of divorce. Okay, now, if you'll remember the video from YouTube, you start with an introduction and you need an attention getter. That attention getter could be a quotation. It could be a startling statement. It could be a dramatic act. It could be a rhetorical question. Okay, or it could be a narrative or a story. Okay. I see a typo here. Okay. Let's look at this attention getter. Imagine a young girl of 5. She's just entering kindergarten. She's making new friends and learning how to interact with other children and developing important social and life skills. Imagine that out of nowhere, this little girl's world is turned upside down because her parents decided to get a divorce. What effect does this have on her? Will she endure ongoing trauma? Let's find out. Okay, that kind of gets the audience's attention. Followed by a credibility statement. I've always wanted to be a child psychologist, and I'm studying that right now. That gives you some credibility. What I'm going to share with you today are some of the things I've learned recently in class. Okay, that's where the information is coming from. In addition, I've consulted several articles on this subject. Okay, so her credibility is coming basically from 3 things. 1, she's always had an interest in child psychology. Secondly, she's studying child psychology in her class right now, and she's also done some additional research. Well, what's the relevance to the audience? Okay, the credibility statement could be construed to answer this question. What gives you the right to talk to the audience about this subject? That's your credibility statement. Okay. Why does the audience need to know this? What's the relevance to the audience? Okay. With a 54% divorce rate, maybe somebody in this audience is or has gone through this. That's not unlikely. If not, then it is likely that you know someone who has gone through this. This speech will help you to understand these negative effects. Now, I believe that the YouTube video asked you to restate your thesis statement here, and I've incorporated that into previewing your main points. So let's look at the introduction. It has 4 or possibly 5 points: attention getter, credibility statement, audience relevance, thesis statement, restated, preview main points. Okay. Now, when I evaluate your speech, I'm going to be looking under introduction. Did you accomplish each one of these? Okay. So preview your main points and restate your thesis statement. The effect that divorce has on children is rarely understood. Today, I will, number 1, explain how adolescents suffer. 2, I'll explain the economic ramifications. 3, I'll talk about peer problems that adolescents face. I want you to put in your outline the introduction in this form. Identify your attention getter, your credibility statement, the audience relevance, and preview your main points. Okay. Then go down and label the body. Main point number 1. Main point number 1 is a complete sentence. When family conflicts arise as a result of a divorce, adolescents suffer. Well, how do they suffer? What's the supporting material? First piece of supporting material. During the first year, these young people may be depressed due to the conflicts between custodial and non-custodial parents. Well, this statement as to how they suffer needs to be explained a little bit more. So you have a second piece of supporting material. Grandparents, aunts, and uncles are often restricted by visitation provisions. Okay, well, you want to go on a little bit further maybe. Almost without exception, adolescents find divorce very painful, but they react in differing degrees depending on their age. Now, what is not included in this outline, and by the way, I borrowed this outline from another source, they did not include the references or the citations, that is where this information comes from. Who says that young people may be depressed? You want to cite an example there. You want to cite a source that, according to Dr. So-and-so in the Journal of Pediatric Psychology, he says, and I quote, okay? And so you probably would include that in your speech, and you need to cite the citation as well as these other items. Where did this information come from? You didn't come up with it, okay? In this case, you may say, one of the things I learned in class is when the professor cited a source and said, etc. Okay, main point number 2. Some of the most negative effects on adolescence may be associated with economic problems. Well, that's what you said you were going to talk about. Okay, first piece of supporting material. The family will most probably experience a lower standard of living. Second, some female custodial parents had poor job skills and must train them before entering the job market. C. Third, the lower standard of living may result in misunderstandings and conflicts within the family, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Again, each of these notions, each of these statements needs to be documented with a citation. Okay. Under this one, as an example, we needed to explain that a little bit more. So we went down to a subtopic. The family may have to move to a poor neighborhood in order to cut costs. As a result, the adolescent may have to attend a different school. Okay. Main point number 3, adolescents from divorced families often experience peer problems. First piece of supporting material, due to relocation and prejudice, adolescents may lose friends. Okay, the lack of a solid relationship with both parents affects an adolescent's attitude toward the opposite sex. Okay, now the only thing that I would say about this outline is that in most cases, you probably want to go down to this level. That is a subtopic or two underneath the first piece, a piece of supporting material. And you see, all of these, none of these go down to the next level of explanation, except for this one right here. Okay, I have to share something with you. If you submit an outline to me that has that none of which goes down to this level of support with a subtopic, I am probably going to indicate on your outline that it lacks detail. Okay, now if your outline lacks detail, there is a good possibility that your speech will lack detail. That's not necessarily so. I mean, you could provide an outline that lacks detail, but the fact of the matter is all of these items were explained more thoroughly with citations, and it had plenty of detail, but it didn't show up in the outline. I'd like to see it in the outline. Okay, introduction, body, summary, and conclusion. Okay, now the thing I want you to understand that was not revealed in the YouTube video is that summary and conclusion are two different things. A summary is reminding the audience as to what it is that you covered, summarizing it. Okay, so listen, before I move on, let me just refresh your memory as to what we covered. My first main point dealt with how children suffer greatly as a result of a divorce, including depression. My second main point indicated that children can be somewhat cut off from loved ones because of visitation restrictions. And third, they suffer various degrees of pain. Okay, that's a summary. All right. The conclusion is the takeaway. Okay, that one takes. It's the conclusion that one draws from the information that's been provided. One can only hope that by understanding what happens to children because of a divorce, that you might be able to help someone else understand that someday. And that's a good conclusion. Now, we're adding something here that was not in the YouTube video, and that's called a clincher. And we in the speech department, all of my colleagues are including this in our speeches, and it's called a clincher. I call it a wowie. Okay, and that's leaving some kind of very dramatic impact that really makes the audience stand up and take notice. Now, it is really kind of an attention getter that you deliver at the end of your speech. All right, and it could be another quotation. It could be an answer to a rhetorical question, or in this case, it could be the end of the story, that there is an alignment with between the clincher and the attention-getting device. So here's the clincher, and it's a real wowie, okay? And by the way, that little girl I mentioned earlier, that little girl was me, okay? That's an example of a clincher. Okay, now this idea of a clincher is such a new and novel idea for students. They probably have not dealt with this before. If you attempt a clincher, I'm going to mark you probably above average. Okay, if you did a relatively good creative clincher, I'm really going to give you a lot of credit for that. Okay. Okay, so that's it. That is the structure of the informative speech, the full sentence outline, the supporting material, the documentation, the citations. Okay, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to read chapter 8 in your textbook, outlining and organizing speeches. Okay, I'm not going to test you on that. I'm not going to check up to see if you read it, but I think it's a good idea. And here's your assignment. Okay, I want you to develop a full sentence outline for the topic that has been approved with the main points that we discussed and I approved. And this week gives you the chance to do the research and then put it into a full sentence outline. Okay, now I want you to pay particular attention to this next item. Okay, I want you to email me and as an attachment, attach your full sentence outline and with a bibliography attached to the bottom of that or on the next page. And the bibliography needs to be in MLA format. So make sure you check that. I'm sure you've got a style book, probably from your English classes. So make sure I'll be looking at that. Now, the bibliography is not works cited. Now, works cited would be a list of resources that you are actually using within your speech. That's one thing. But a bibliography are all of the sources that you looked at, whether you're using them in your speech or not. Now, will they include works cited? Yes, of course. But in addition to works cited, anything else that you looked at. You may have read an article or a chapter in a textbook or whatever to give you some background information so that you feel more comfortable. List that, okay? And that's what's included in the bibliography. Now, for your informative speech, and I'm gonna grade you on this, okay? A minimum of 3 sources of information is required. Okay, now you probably will have more than that, but you must have at least 3 sources of information, which might include sources that you cited, undoubtedly, probably, but in addition, anything else that you looked at as well. Okay, so that's it for this week, and it's a lot. Okay, so you've got to clean up your topic and your main points. You got to make sure you've got the right organizational pattern. You've got to do your research, okay, and then you've got to put that into a full sentence outline, okay. Then that's all for right now. I'm looking forward to seeing your outlines for your informative speech.